I want to tell you the story about a man named Balaam. He lived many, many years ago, and it was during the time that Israel had just crossed the Red Sea. They had escaped from Egypt, and they had come to the plains of Moab. Now, this is right after the time that the 12 spies, 2 of them said they should go in, and the 10 said they shouldn't, so they decided not to. And now they're wandering in the wilderness, really with no purpose, because they made the decision to not go into the promised land. So they landed in this area called the Plains of Moab, and the king of that area was King Balak. And King Balak was pretty afraid of the Israelites. There were about 1 million to 3 million people camping out in your backyard. And he realized, man, that my army's not going to compete with this army. It was a pretty big deal. And so he was getting a little worried, and he had heard a rumor about a guy named Balaam, who lived almost 400 miles from where they were at. But Balaam had this knack of blessing and cursing, and he was known for somebody. When he blessed, they were blessed, and when they were cursed, they were cursed. And so Balak's like, man, if I'm gonna defeat this large group of people, I need to fight with blessings and cursings. I can't fight with just weapons. My army's never going to take them. So he sent a group of his advisors to go 400 miles all the way up to where Balaam was at. And they went to Balaam, and when they came, they brought all kinds of gifts and money and gold and silver and just plain stuff to try to convince Balaam that he needed to take a 400-mile trip back to the plains of Moab. So they go up there and they get to Balak's house. They go up and ring the doorbell, and Balaam comes to the front door, and he's like, hey, how are you? And introduces himself to him and said, we're from the kingdom of Moab, and King Balak has sent us to come and ask if you will come and curse this large group of people that are inhabiting our land, and they're kind of destroying the area, which is our land, and we're afraid of them. And they're the people that have come out of Egypt. Will you consider doing that? Well, you know, Balaam, some think Balaam was a prophet of God, even though he wasn't from Abraham, that there were still people who believed in God. Others believe he was just flat out a sorcerer, and he did sorcery things. But Balaam realized that if he was going to do that, he needed to go and ask God if he should do that. That's why many believe he was a prophet of God. So he said, spend the night and I'll go talk to God. So they spend the night, and Balaam goes and asks God, and he goes to God, and God comes to Balaam and actually says, hey, Balaam, who are those people that are with you? It's kind of like what God does, you know, whenever he's like, I know what's going on. I'm just going to see if you're going to tell me what's going on. And Balaam says, well, they brought all this stuff, and they want me to go and curse these people in the land. And so I was thinking maybe I might go do that. And God says, you're not going to go curse those people, because those people have been blessed by me, and you're not going to curse those people. So the next morning, Balaam wakes up and he goes to the guys. He says, listen, guys, you know, I would love to come with you, but God says I can't. You know, it's almost like saying, I'd love to hang out with you guys, but my dad says I got to do my homework. You know, that attitude where I want to come with you, but I'm not allowed to come with you thing. So the men of Balak, they go back to the plains of Moab without Balaam. And they get there, and Balak is kind of furious, because if you're thinking you're the king of Moab, and your people are depending on you to rescue and protect them, and the one hope you had isn't going to come, there's a desperation that takes over. And so Balak says, what do you mean you didn't bring back Balaam? He gives them more money. He says, you go back there, and I'm going to send princes and more important people with way more wealth, and I want you to go 400 miles back, and I want you to make sure to bring back Balaam. So they head back up there and find Balaam again, ring the doorbell. Balaam goes, hi, did you get, what happened? Why are you back? And they said, well, our king isn't very happy and we really need you. And we're wondering if you'd consider, again, we brought more stuff. We thought maybe there's basically we all tend to believe there's a price for everyone. I mean, think about it. We all kind of think everybody can be bought. What would it take to buy Balaam to get him to come back down to Moab? And so Balaam, rather than saying, no, God already said no, I'm not going to question that. God's not a kind of God that changes his mind very easily. Balaam says, you know what? You come this far, stay the night, and I'll go and talk to God. So he goes back and he talks to God, and even in it, Balaam reveals something about himself, that there really is something in him that could be bought. And he goes to God and he says, God, they've come back, they've come all this way, and they brought a lot of stuff, God. Imagine what I could do with this stuff. Imagine how I could help people with this stuff. And God actually says, fine, Balaam. They've come this far, go ahead, go with them. But you can only say what I tell you to say. I don't want you saying anything else. I want you only saying what comes out of my mouth through your mouth. So Balaam goes to bed. Next morning he gets up. A couple of his friends head out with him. He tells them, we can go back to Moab. God said I could do it. And so they set out early in the morning and they're headed back to Moab, and he's riding his trusty donkey. And out of nowhere, God opens the eyes of the donkey, and the donkey sees an angel with a sword ready to yield death upon Balaam. So the donkey takes off to the right and runs out to the field and lays down. And Balaam's like furious, like, what are you doing right now? And my donkey's just lost his head. And he starts to beat his donkey. He starts to hit his donkey and just angry and yelling at his donkey. Eventually he gets the donkey up and the donkey keeps walking. They go a little bit further, and sure enough, God opens the eyes of the donkey again, and he sees the same angel with the same sword ready to just slaughter them. And they're in this tight passageway, and Balaam's riding the donkey, and the donkey runs Balaam's foot into the wall of the ledge that he was at and crushes his foot against and Balaam is again furious. Now, the whole time, while Balaam is doing all this road rage, his two friends are basically watching him do this, and he's just beating his donkey, just beating it. And they're like, dude, what's going on here right now? And the donkey, he's just beside me. He's like, why did you do that? Now my foot hurts and it's swelling, it's black and blue. What are you doing, you dumb donkey? He's just angry at this donkey. Well, eventually they get going again. A third time the donkey's going along. And again, the Lord opens up the donkey's eyes, and he sees that same angel with the sword. And instead of going one direction or running, he just drops to the ground. And Balaam is now beside himself. He is beating this donkey and just beating and beating and beating. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, God opens the donkey's mouth, and he begins to speak in a language that Balaam can understand. I mean, the donkey starts to talk to him, and he says, hey, why are you beating me? And this is the craziest part, is Balaam talks back to the donkey. Not like donkeys can't talk. Balaam actually has a conversation with the donkey, and he says, because I'm beating you, because you ran my foot into the wall, you're running all over the place, just do what you're supposed to do and take me to where I'm supposed to go. And the donkey says, you have owned me for a long time. Have I been known to do this in the past? I mean, like, you know me. You know I don't do this type of thing. And it was in that moment, God opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the same angel the donkey saw. And he realized that the donkey he had been beating was his donkey was actually protecting him. Mm-hmm. And the angel Lord came and said, surely, had your donkey not done that, you would have been killed. See, what Balaam didn't understand was, even though God said, yes, you go, but you only say what I'm going to tell you to say, God knew in Balaam's heart, he was going to do whatever it would take to get that money. Even if it meant going through a few loopholes. So Balaam, he falls on his face and he repents and he says, God, if you want, I'll go back. Just tell me to go back. And the angel of the Lord says, no, keep going, but only say what I tell you to say. So he gets to Moab and he meets Balak, and Balak knows he's coming, so he meets him right out to the southern plain. And he says, look, this is the vast nation of Israel. And they see the outskirts of the nation of Israel. And he says, there's not much time. We need you to curse these people. And Balaam says, listen, I told your guys I can only say what God tells me to say, but I will go up, create 7 altars, and sacrifice animals on those altars. So they did, and they go up, and Balaam looks out over the plains of Moab where the Israelites were camped, and out of his mouth comes a blessing. Now keep in mind, the people of Israel had no idea this was happening. They had no idea Balaam was up there. They had no idea it was taking place. It's a lot like life. We have no idea what's taking place a lot of times on the outside. Yeah. And even though there are enemies that want us cursed, God has people blessing us and we don't even know it, all around us. And so he comes back down and he speaks this blessing over Israel, and Balak he's upset now. He's like, I brought you all the way over here. I had all this stuff. I promised you all this wealth. Name your price. I'll give it to you. Just curse these people. He says, well, I'll go try another time. He takes him to another mount and offers sacrifice. And he goes up there, and out of his mouth, he blesses them again. And Balak's like, are you kidding me? Do you not hear me? These people are going to destroy us. They're going to destroy my people. You gotta curse them, not we brought you here to curse them. Balaam's like, listen, I told you I can only do what God's putting in my mouth to do. So he says, well, let's try it one more time. And they go up to the 3rd spot. But this time, when Balaam gets up there, he speaks a blessing, but in the blessing, he prophesies King David would come and King Jesus would come. He prophesied the coming of the Messiah over them. And of course, Balak is again furious. Now, it's important to understand that in the Bible, Balaam is mentioned 59 times. More than Mary, more than any of the apostles. He's an important figure in the Bible, even though he's in many ways godless. I mean, he's got some real issues. He was motivated by money to do any of it. He was willing to disobey God to get what he really wanted in his heart. So he comes down. Balak's upset because he's brought him all the way down here. They've spent all of this time, and Balaam won't curse them. But what he does do is he gives 4 curses over the 4 enemies of Israel. He blessed the Israelites, and then he cursed the enemies of Israel. All of this taking place without them ever knowing it was happening, Israel ever knowing it was happening. They get finished with all of this, and this is the part I think that's really identifies Balaam and what he wanted. It says that Balaam took Balak aside and he says, listen, I could not curse Israel. I had to bless them because God is the one who blesses. But if you want to get Israel to struggle and to collapse and fall apart, you need to get them to worship other gods and to have sexual immorality among themselves and among the people of Moab. See, Balaam wanted that money, and he would do whatever it would take to do it. Maybe he couldn't curse Israel, but he was going to give Balak a clue on how to undermine Israel. You know, there's some lessons you can learn from Balaam. One is the error of Balaam. Every person has blind spots in their life that will influence the decisions that you make. Balaam's was greed. Balaam, through all of the success of the blessing and cursing, he struggled with greed. You know, it says in Jude 1:11, woe to them, they have taken the way of Cain, they have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. They have been destroyed in Korah's rebellion. Balaam, He was all about greed and wanting money. It was his error. It was the thing that had his heart, and it affected every decision he made. The way of Balaam, it also talks about the way of Balaam in 2 Peter 2:15. It says, they have left the straight way. And that's what happens. Those blind spots, you may not even know they're there. Other people know they're there, but maybe you don't recognize how much it influences your life. And in the way of Balaam, he left the straight path. He left obedience and wandered off to follow the way of Balaam, son of Bezer, who loved the wages of wickedness. He left. God was speaking to him. God was literally using him to bless the Israelites. And he tried to figure out a way to get what he wanted without actually coming against God. He wanted to find a loophole. And that really was the doctrine of Balaam, is finding that loophole. In Revelation 2:14, it says, nevertheless, I have a few things against you. There are some among you who hold the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin so that they ate food sacrificed to idols and commit sexual immorality. Balak's like, I'm going to find a loophole. Like God said I couldn't say anything against them, but he didn't say I couldn't tell Balak how to get him to fall. He didn't tell him, how do I get him to compromise? He didn't say that. So I can do what God's telling me to do and still get what I want. That really is the first lesson, is the error of what Balaam was making. The second lesson is the donkey is your friend. The donkey's your friend. You know, this is funny because you can't help but talk about this donkey and think about the donkey in Shrek. You know, if I could actually imitate his voice, I would have done that, right? You know, maybe with even an English accent or something. But this donkey is taking Balaam to Moab. God didn't even want Balaam going to Moab, but because he knew Balaam was going to find a way to do it, he said, fine, go, but only say what I'm going to say. This donkey protected Balaam. The sword was from God, but that donkey was from God. That sword was a symbol of God's judgment, but that donkey was a symbol of God's grace. See, the angel of the Lord said, you know what, Balaam, if it weren't for that donkey, you would have been killed and that donkey would have survived. But that donkey stood in your way, prevented you from doing what you wanted because it wanted to protect you, because it was loyal and faithful to you. You know there are donkeys in your life? Donkeys in your life. They may look like friends or teachers or pastors or parents. May look like a spouse. They may look like they're just getting in your way and keeping you from what you think is best. But those donkeys in your life are put there by God's grace. God's grace, a gift of grace in your life. I'd really encourage you to stop and ask, what donkeys do I have in my life that I'm just beating? Like I'm angry. I'm yelling at them. I curse them. I'm just mad at them but God's put them there. And they're not there to hold you back. For most of Balaam's experience with that donkey, he had never acted that way. He had always been faithful to take Balaam where he wanted to be and go, but in this instance, he didn't. You have to ask yourself, why is it that there are people in my life right now that are preventing me from doing something that I really want to do? And the third lesson is the power of blessings and curses. You know, the Israelites, and I had mentioned this before, they didn't even know this was going on. Like there were people trying to curse them, and God sent someone to bless them. See, I think we underestimate how important curses and blessings are. I really do. You know, in Deuteronomy says, however, the Lord your God will not listen to Balaam, but turn the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God loves you. You know he loves you. But don't ever estimate the power of a blessing. I think really, if you stop and think about it, if the blessing wasn't that important, why was it such a big deal that God told Balaam not to go to curse them? If Balaam could not curse what God had blessed, why was God so emphatic about stopping Balaam from cursing them? There is power in our words to curse and bless. Don't ever estimate the power of your words. To bless your job, to bless your family, to bless your spouse, to bless your finances, to bless your health. How you talk about those things. because of who you are in Christ. You have a connection to heaven. What you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and what you loose on earth will be loose in heaven. You have the power of blessing and cursing. In Deuteronomy, it goes on, this day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live. Take heed from the lessons of Balaam. He may not have been one of those people you want to say, I want to emulate my life after, but in many ways, we're a lot like Balaam. There are blind spots in our life that are influencing our decisions and impacting why we make decisions to disobey God. And Balaam had those same blind spots. And God put a donkey in his life, just like he's putting a donkey in your life to protect you. Listen to your donkey, and life will go well, and you will be blessed. And realize that blessing and cursing is the real deal, and it makes a difference. And just as Balaam blessed the Israelites, even though they were imperfect, God will bless those things that you bless, and he will curse those things you curse. What a great story, isn't it?